It's the dead of night. You and your D&D adventuring party are sneaking through the back alleyways of a hostile city. Your dungeon master looks down, then directly at you and says, "You caught movement out of the corner of your eye." But why you? How did they know? You didn't have to make a roll. The DM was using what is called your passive perception score. We'll be covering passive abilities and checks on today's Handbooker Helper.
Don't know how to play? We'll show you the way. Handbooker Helper. Handbooker Helper.
Passive ability checks represent an average result for things you've done over and over again and may not require specific focus. For the most common example, look towards the bottom left of your standard D&D 5e character sheet under the ability scores, and you'll see a box for passive perception. This score represents your character's baseline average to notice things in the world around you without having to roll for an ability check. Your ability to just have an eye for detail without specifically seeking it out. This score is determined by adding 10 to your perception skill bonus. Almost as if you rolled right down the middle on that D20. If your passive score equals or is greater than the DC the DM has determined for success, then they will let you know what you've slyly noticed without needing to roll. And passive scores aren't limited to just your perception. Any and all skills can have a passive score associated with them, but they're most often used for cognitive traits like perception and insight. Now, you may be wondering, hey, if all of these abilities have passive score associated with them, why is perception so special and gets its very own box? Great question. Passive perception is probably the most relevant of the passive abilities. The higher your character passive perception score, the better the chance they have of noticing that assassin that's been stalking your party, or the unnaturally cool breeze that just drifted through the room. After all, you can't read your DM's mind that things are secretly afoot. Luckily, you have your character's intuition to inform you. Thanks, Dungeon Master. Mind you, don't just rely on your passive perception. Just because you haven't noticed something doesn't mean it's not cleverly hidden from view. Telling your DM you'd like to actively perceive something can lead to rolling higher than your passive and clue you into things that you would have missed, while rolling lower only leaves you where you began without trying. So no harm, no foul, other than, not noticing that thing you missed. Your passive insight is another useful score example, signifying your general awareness of social cues, body language, and reading individuals around you. If it's high enough, you'll be keen to naturally notice that street barker acting dubiously while peddling his wares, or that noble inviting you in for dinner seeming to be nervous behind their manners. If you haven't yet noticed anything funny, and don't trust your instincts, then you can actively roll to attempt a higher result and maybe read past their facade, or confirm they are telling the truth and put you all at ease. Your passive ability scores can also be adjusted based on the scenario. If a circumstance would lend a character to perhaps have an advantage on the passive skill in question, you can add an additional 5 to that passive score. Conversely, should they be at a disadvantage, consider that score about 5 lower than normal. To really use any relevant passive ability scores most effectively, as the players really can't be responsible for passive skills coming into play, a dungeon master should try to keep a list of the more useful player passive scores behind their screen. This allows them to incorporate them into the story when it makes the most sense, and reward those players who really focused on those particular skills. Your passive scores basically exist to remind you that you're a badass hero who happens to be good enough at some things that it's not always a challenge. If you're a beefy barbarian, chances are you don't need to roll to get a heavy crate down from the top shelf. Your passive strength score tells us that you've lifted weighty objects your whole life and don't need a D20 to justify your biceps. Or maybe you're an extremely talented burglar who has infiltrated some of the greatest of vaults. You don't always need to roll to pick a basic lock on some peasant's kitchen door. That's it for passive ability checks. Now, go inhale deeply from your respective smell bags. And be the hero that you were meant to be.
Handbook. Handbooker Helper.